Forget blankets. This thin jacket liner was more effective than any coat in World War II. During the Second World War, thousands of soldiers suffered from the cold long before they ever encountered enemy fire. Winter campaigns across Europe revealed a harsh reality exposure alone could weaken entire units. Frostbite, exhaustion, and loss of dexterity quietly removed soldiers from the battlefield. Yet beneath many uniforms was a strange, thin garment that seemed almost insignificant at first glance. It was a quilted jacket liner, lightweight, flexible, and no thicker than an ordinary shirt, hidden in history. Despite its modest appearance, this liner proved more effective than many of the heavy coats and blankets armies had relied upon for generations. Infantrymen quickly recognized its value. Some went so far as to acquire them from other units, particularly air crews, who had been issued early versions designed for high-altitude cold. What seemed like a minor piece of clothing was actually a carefully engineered response to a deeper problem: how the human body truly loses heat in harsh conditions. The question that puzzled many soldiers at the time still holds relevance today. Why did such a thin layer outperform bulky winter gear? And why did it succeed where traditional insulation failed? The answer lies in something deceptively simple: still air. The war forced armies to confront a basic misunderstanding about warmth. For centuries, cold weather clothing relied primarily on thickness. Heavy wool coats, thick blankets, and layered overgarments formed the backbone of military winter equipment well into the 20th century. The assumption was straightforward: more material meant more warmth. In static environments, this idea worked reasonably well. A guard standing watch beside a fire or a soldier resting inside a shelter could benefit from thick layers that trapped body heat. But the Second World War was defined by mobility. Infantry marched across frozen terrain, rode in open vehicles, dug defensive positions in snow-covered fields, and operated in conditions where shelter was often unavailable. Under these circumstances, heavy clothing created problems. Thick wool coats trapped moisture from sweat during movement. Once that moisture cooled, it accelerated heat loss. Wet wool also became heavy and stiff, restricting movement and reducing a soldier's ability to perform basic tasks. A coat that felt protective during inactivity could become a liability during long patrols or rapid advances. This cycle, overheating while moving and freezing once still, was one of the most common complaints recorded in wartime field reports. Military planners slowly realized that the traditional focus on bulk insulation overlooked a more important factor: the stability of the warm air surrounding the body. Researchers began studying how the body actually loses heat in the field. By the early 1940s, military medical teams and quartermaster researchers began examining cold exposure more systematically. Their findings reshaped how armies approached winter clothing. Heat leaves the body through conduction, convection, and evaporation. Thick materials can slow some of that heat transfer, but only if they maintain stable air pockets and remain relatively dry. Still air is the real insulator. If a garment traps small layers of air close to the skin, those layers warm quickly and slow the outward movement of heat. However, if wind penetrates the clothing or moisture fills those spaces, insulation breaks down rapidly. The ideal solution, researchers concluded, was not necessarily thicker clothing. It was clothing that created stable air pockets while allowing moisture to escape. This concept eventually led to the adoption of layered clothing systems. Instead of relying on one heavy garment, soldiers would wear multiple lighter layers, each serving a specific purpose. The quilted liner jacket became the central insulating layer within that system. The liner's quilted design quietly solved several problems at once. The liner itself was remarkably simple. Two thin layers of cotton fabric were stitched together with a lightweight insulating batting sandwiched between them. The stitching formed a grid pattern across the entire garment. These stitches kept the batting evenly distributed while creating hundreds of small compartments. Each compartment trapped a pocket of air. Because the liner sat close to the body, it captured heat as soon as the body produced it. At the same time, the breathable cotton allowed moisture from perspiration to migrate outward instead of saturating the insulation. When worn beneath a wind-resistant field jacket, the system worked even better. The outer jacket blocked wind while the liner preserved the warm air layer beneath it. Together they created a stable microclimate around the torso and arms. The warmth did not come from thick insulation alone. It came from managing air movement and moisture, two factors that earlier military clothing had largely ignored. Aircrew equipment unexpectedly influenced infantry survival. Interestingly, some early forms of these quilted liners appeared in aviation gear before they became common in infantry clothing. Aircrews operating at high altitudes faced extreme cold, especially in unpressurized bombers and fighters where temperatures could fall far below freezing. Heavy coats were just impractical inside cramped cockpits, filled with controls and instrumentation. Pilots needed insulation that allowed mobility. Quilted liners provided that solution. They offered warmth without restricting arm movement or interfering with flight equipment. Infantrymen who encountered these garments quickly recognized their usefulness. Reports from various theaters describe soldiers seeking similar liners because they provided warmth while still allowing freedom of movement during combat operations. The idea that a pilot's lightweight liner could outperform a traditional winter coat seemed counterintuitive at first, but the physics behind it made sense. Efficiency mattered more than bulk. Mobility and energy conservation proved just as important as warmth. The value of the liner extended beyond simple insulation. Soldiers operating in cold environments expend significant energy maintaining body temperature. If clothing traps sweat or restricts movement, that energy demand increases even further. A lightweight insulating layer allowed soldiers to move more efficiently. They could march, dig, climb, and maneuver without carrying the burden of heavy outer garments. Less fatigue meant greater endurance. In prolonged winter operations, that difference could determine whether a unit remained effective or slowly deteriorated under environmental strain. Cold weather warfare is often described as a battle against the environment as much as the enemy. Gear that helped soldiers maintain energy and body heat therefore became a strategic asset rather than just a comfort item. The liner also simplified wartime manufacturing and logistics. Another advantage was its practicality within the massive wartime supply system. Heavy wool garments required large quantities of raw material and took longer to manufacture. They also occupied significant cargo space when transported across oceans. Quilted liners used less material and could be produced rapidly using industrial sewing methods. Their lightweight meant more units could be shipped in the same cargo space. This efficiency allowed armies to distribute them widely once their benefits became clear. In a conflict that demanded equipping millions of soldiers across multiple continents, small manufacturing advantages often translated into significant logistical gains. The principles behind the liner echoed techniques used by older cold weather cultures. While the liner seemed innovative in the context of modern military clothing, the underlying principle was not entirely new. Indigenous Arctic cultures had long understood the importance of managing air and moisture within clothing systems. Fur garments worn by Inuit communities, for example, created natural air pockets while allowing controlled ventilation. Layered clothing constructed from animal skins and fur maintained warmth by preserving still air close to the body. Military researchers eventually recognized that these traditional approaches aligned closely with the emerging scientific understanding of insulation. The quilted liner represented a modern industrial adaptation of similar ideas. By the mid-20th century, armies were rediscovering principles that cold weather societies had relied upon for generations. The lessons from this simple garment shaped modern cold weather gear. After the war, military clothing systems continued to evolve, but the layered approach remained central. Today's cold weather gear, whether used by soldiers, mountaineers, or expedition teams, follows the same logic developed during those wartime experiments. Moisture-wicking base layers move sweat away from the skin. Insulating mid-layers trap warm air. Protective outer shells block wind and precipitation. The thin quilted liner of World War II was an early version of that middle layer. Modern synthetic insulation materials may be more advanced, but they still rely on the same principle, preserving stable air pockets while preventing moisture buildup. What appeared to be a simple piece of wartime clothing quietly helped shape the foundation of modern cold-weather survival equipment. Small innovations often reveal the deeper realities of warfare. Large battles dominate historical memory, yet the everyday realities of soldiers' lives often depend on smaller innovations. A thin jacket liner rarely appears in official battle reports or strategic summaries. It did not capture headlines or inspire dramatic wartime propaganda, but for the soldiers who wore it through freezing nights in foxholes or on long winter marches, its importance was undeniable. Staying warm meant staying alert. Staying alert meant surviving another day in an environment where both nature and enemy forces posed constant threats. In this way, seemingly minor design decisions could influence the endurance and effectiveness of entire units. Remembering these overlooked solutions helps us understand war more honestly. Studying the quieter innovations of wartime life offers a more complete picture of history. The quilted liner jacket reminds us that survival in extreme environments often depends on practical knowledge rather than dramatic technology. Understanding airflow, moisture, and human physiology proved just as important as developing new weapons. These lessons remain relevant today. Cold exposure continues to challenge soldiers, explorers, and disaster survivors alike. The basic physics that kept World War II soldiers warm has not changed. Sometimes the most valuable tools are not the largest or most impressive. Sometimes they are the simplest. If you value uncovering the overlooked stories that shaped history, consider subscribing to Hidden in History. And if this exploration added something new to your understanding of the past, share the video so others can discover the lessons history quietly preserves.